Imagine a letter penned by an unseen hand, addressed not to the masses but to you personally. This letter carries words etched in eternity, words that do not fade with the passing of days or crumble with the decay of earthly things. It is God's message, a communication from the Creator to his creation, as intimate as a whisper, yet as powerful as the roaring sea. God's message is timeless, transcending the boundaries of history, culture, and language. It calls to every soul with clarity and purpose, offering both a challenge and an invitation. This reality humbles us when we consider that such a message, spoken from the heart of eternity, reaches each of us personally. It is not bound to an era, nor does it favor one people over another. It is as relevant to the shepherds of ancient Israel as it is to the city dwellers of our modern age. God's voice echoes through the centuries, untouched by the erosion of time, calling each individual to pause, listen, and respond. The timelessness of God's message is a reflection of his eternal nature. He exists outside of time, yet he enters into it for our sake. From the moment he breathed life into humanity, his voice has been calling us back to him, offering a way to reconcile our brokenness with his holiness. This message is not simply a collection of instructions or moral guidelines, though it contains wisdom for how we live. It is at its core a declaration of his love and an invitation into relationship. We often think of messages as fleeting, a text, a letter, a word spoken in passing. They are carried on the wind and lost to time. But God's message endures. Consider the scriptures, written over centuries by men inspired by his Spirit, yet unified in their purpose. They speak to truths that are not confined to the context of their writing, but resonate with every human heart because they address universal needs, our longing for meaning, our desire for love, and our hope for redemption. This message also transcends language, for it is not limited to words alone. It is carried in the beauty of creation, in the rising of the sun and the order of the cosmos. The heavens declare his glory, and the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Even those who have never heard his name are not without witness, for the voice of God is woven into the fabric of existence. This silent testimony is enough to stir the soul and point it toward its maker. Yet for all its grandeur, God's message is deeply personal. It is not a proclamation to the faceless masses, but a whisper to the heart of every individual. It calls us by name, acknowledging our uniqueness while also uniting us in a common purpose. When we hear it, we are faced with a choice, to respond or to turn away. The message does not impose itself. It respects the freedom with which we were created. But it is persistent, gently and lovingly inviting us to step into the fullness of life he offers. The clarity of this message lies in its simplicity, though its implications are profound. At its heart, it declares that God is with us and for us. He has not abandoned us to wander in darkness, but has provided a light to guide our way. This light is not merely a concept or philosophy. It is a person. In Jesus Christ, the message of God took on flesh and dwelt among us. His life, death, and resurrection embody the eternal call of God to humanity. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And yet, the message is also a challenge. It calls us to live not for ourselves, but for the one who created us. It challenges our pride, our self-sufficiency, and our attachment to the transient things of this world. It demands that we examine our hearts and align our lives with his truth. This is not an easy path, but it is a path worth taking, for in surrendering to his call, we find the very freedom we have sought in all the wrong places. God's message endures because it is rooted in his character, and his character does not change. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. His love, his justice, his mercy, all are constant, and his message reflects that constancy. It is a lifeline to a world adrift, a beacon of hope in the storms of life. Though we may falter and fail, his voice continues to call, offering grace upon grace. To hear this message is to encounter eternity breaking into the present. It is to be reminded that we are not alone, that we are loved beyond measure, and that our lives have purpose. It is a call to something greater than ourselves, a summons to live in the light of his truth and to share that light with others. God's message is timeless because it speaks to the deepest parts of who we are and draws us into the eternal. The message of God comes to us in manifold ways, some as subtle as a whisper and others as powerful as a thunderclap. It is a dynamic revelation, shaped not by the limitations of our understanding, but by the infinite wisdom of the one who speaks. His voice can pierce through the noise of our busy lives, or softly nudge our hearts when we least expect it. Whether through the quiet conviction of conscience or the undeniable majesty of creation, the ways in which God speaks reveal both his power and his tenderness. In the stillness of our hearts, God often whispers truths that are easily overlooked amid the clamor of the world. These whispers are moments of clarity, when our spirit recognizes what our mind might deny, a gentle reminder of his presence, his love, or his call to action. They are like seeds planted in the soil of our hearts, requiring time and attention to grow. Such whispers may come as a sudden thought to reach out to someone in need, a moment of peace in prayer, or an unexpected insight while reading Scripture. They are deeply personal, meant for us to hear and respond to individually, yet these whispers require attentiveness, for they are not loud or demanding. They invite us into stillness, into quiet reflection, where the noise of the world fades and his voice becomes clear. But there are times when God speaks with thunder, moments when his message comes not as a suggestion but as an undeniable reality. These moments shake us from complacency and force us to confront truths we may have ignored or resisted. They are the unmistakable callings, the divine interventions that interrupt our plans and redirect our paths. For some, this may come in the form of a life-changing event, a moment of profound loss, a miraculous provision, or an encounter with someone who speaks truth into our lives with unexpected clarity. These moments are not meant to instill fear but to awaken us, to remind us of the eternal weight of God's purposes. God's thunderous voice also reverberates in the grandeur of creation, the vastness of the universe, the beauty of a sunset, the intricacy of a single flower. Each speaks of his glory and power. These are the moments when the Creator seems to shout his presence through the works of his hands, leaving us in awe and reminding us of our place in the vastness of his design. Such experiences stir within us a sense of wonder, a longing to know the one who crafted it all. They compel us to lift our eyes from the mundane and recognize the hand of God in all things. But yet, whether God speaks in whispers or in thunder, his message remains consistent. He is drawing us to himself. The variety in his communication is not a reflection of indecision, but of his deep understanding of our hearts. Some of us need the gentle encouragement of a whisper to find our way, while others require the wake-up call of thunder to break through our stubbornness. His methods are as varied as the individuals he calls, yet his purpose is unchanging, to bring us into communion with him. The responsibility lies with us to cultivate spiritual attentiveness, to train our hearts and minds to discern his voice in whatever form it takes. This means creating space in our lives for silence, for prayer, for reflection. It means being willing to pause and listen, even when life feels overwhelming. It also means responding in obedience when his voice calls us to action, trusting that he knows what is best, even when the path is unclear. God's whispers and thunders are not contradictory, but complementary. Together they reveal the fullness of his character, both his intimacy and his majesty, his gentleness and his might. The whisper invites us into relationship, while the thunder reminds us of his sovereignty. In both, we see a God who is deeply personal, yet infinitely powerful, a God who knows when to speak softly to our hearts and when to shake us to our core. To hear his voice, in whatever form it comes, is a gift. It is an invitation to step into his story, to align our lives with his purposes. Whether in the still small voice or the roaring proclamation, God's message is always for our good, always drawing us closer to the one who loves us beyond measure. The question is whether we will listen, whether we will allow his voice to shape us, transform us, and lead us into the fullness of life he promises. Receiving God's message often comes with a cost, and it is one that touches the deepest parts of who we are. It challenges our comfort, confronts our ego, and demands that we release our grip on the things we hold most dear in this world. Yet, within this cost lies a profound paradox. In surrendering what we cannot keep, we gain that which we can never lose. This cost is not imposed arbitrarily, but is intrinsic to the nature of true discipleship. To respond to God's call is to embark on a journey that transforms us. Yet such transformation requires us to leave behind the lesser things to embrace the greater. The cost of following God begins with the discomfort of self-examination. His message shines a light on our hearts, exposing the sin and selfishness we often try to ignore or justify. This is not a cruel act, but a merciful one, for it is only when we see ourselves clearly that we can truly grasp the depth of His grace. Yet facing this truth is painful, as it requires us to acknowledge our failures and let go of the illusion of self-sufficiency, to repent, to turn away from the old patterns that have bound us and step into the freedom He offers. Ego is another obstacle that must be laid down. God's message challenges the pride that insists we are the masters of our own lives, that our worth is defined by our achievements or possessions. The call of God reminds us that we are not self-made, but are created beings, dependent on Him for every breath. This truth can feel humbling, even unsettling, to a world that glorifies independence and self-reliance. Yet when we release our ego, we discover the beauty of living in the light of His purpose, where our identity is no longer tied to the fleeting accolades of the world, but is rooted in the unshakable truth of being His beloved. Perhaps the most difficult cost is the call to relinquish our attachment to worldly treasures. These treasures are not always material. They can also be the dreams, plans, and desires we have cherished in our hearts. God's message often calls us to hold these things loosely, to trust that His plans for us are better than anything we could imagine. This surrender is not easy, for it requires faith in the unseen and a willingness to step into the unknown. Yet, in letting go, we make room to receive the abundant life He promises, a life filled not with empty pleasures but with eternal significance. The cost of the call also includes the challenge of walking a path that is often counter to the world's values. God's message asks us to live lives marked by love, humility, and sacrifice, even when such choices may lead to misunderstanding, rejection, or persecution. It is not an easy road, but it is the road that leads to true life. Jesus Himself warned that following Him would mean taking up our cross, a symbol of both suffering and ultimate redemption. Yet, He also promised that this path, though narrow, is the one that leads to life everlasting. The beauty of this cost is that it is not borne alone. God does not call us to surrender without also offering His presence, His strength, and His grace. He walks with us every step of the way, providing what we need to endure and to thrive. The things we give up are nothing compared to the richness of what we gain, a relationship with Him, a purpose that transcends the temporary, and a hope that transcends the temporary, and a hope that cannot be shaken. The cost of the call is an act of trust. It is believing that the one who calls us is faithful, that His plans are for our good, and that His promises are true. It is a leap of faith into His arms, knowing that He will catch us and lead us into the fullness of life. Though the cost may seem great, the reward is infinitely greater. To know Him, to be known by Him, and to live as part of His eternal kingdom. Believing and acting on God's message requires faith, a trust that often grows in the shadow of uncertainty. This trust is not merely intellectual assent, but a deeply rooted confidence in the character and promises of God. It demands that we let go of the need for complete understanding and instead lean into the assurance that He is good, sovereign, and present. Trusting God transforms us, reshaping our hearts and aligning our lives with His divine purpose, even when the path ahead is unclear. Trust begins where certainty ends. When God calls us, He rarely lays out the entire journey before us. Instead, He asks us to take the first step, to move forward in obedience even when we do not know where the road will lead. This is not an arbitrary test, but an invitation to relationship. Trust is not about having all the answers. It is about knowing the one who does. Awareness is not about prediction. It is about patience and frustration. In the face of doubt or fear, trust whispers that God is faithful, that His plans for us are good, and that He will provide what we need in His perfect timing. This journey of trust often requires us to confront our deepest insecurities and fears. We are conditioned to rely on what we can see, measure, and control. God's message, however, calls us to walk by faith, not by sight. This can feel like stepping into the unknown, a place where our usual supports and safeguards are stripped away. Yet it is in this vulnerability that we come to experience the steadfastness of God. His faithfulness becomes not just a theological concept, but a lived reality, revealed in the moments when we have nothing else to rely on but Him. Trusting God does not mean the absence of struggle or doubt. Even the greatest figures of faith wrestled with questions and uncertainties. Abraham trusted God enough to leave his homeland even though he did not know where he was going. Yet he also questioned how God's promises could come to pass. David, a man after God's own heart, wrote psalms that alternated between declarations of trust and cries of anguish. These stories remind us that trust is not a linear journey but a dynamic relationship, one in which God meets us where we are and gently leads us forward. Faith grows in the soil of surrender. To trust God fully, we must release our grip on the illusion of control. This surrender is not passive resignation but active reliance on His wisdom and love. It means acknowledging that His ways are higher than our ways and His thoughts higher than our thoughts. When we surrender, we allow Him to guide us, even when His direction challenges our expectations or disrupts our plans. In this surrender, we find peace, not because the road becomes easy, but because we are no longer walking it alone. The trust we place in God transforms not only our perspective but also our character. As we rely on Him, we begin to reflect His attributes in our lives. We become more patient, knowing that His timing is perfect. We grow in courage, knowing that He goes before us and stands beside us. We develop a deeper sense of compassion as we recognize how His grace sustains us in our weakness. Trust shapes us into vessels of His purpose, allowing His light to shine through us even in the darkest moments. Perhaps the most profound aspect of trust is its ability to deepen our relationship with God. Trust is the foundation of intimacy. When we place our confidence in Him, we open our hearts to His presence and allow Him to work in and through us. This relationship is not built on blind faith, but on the countless ways He reveals Himself as trustworthy. Each answered prayer, each moment of provision, and each experience of His peace becomes a stone in the foundation of our trust. In trusting God, we find freedom. We are no longer bound by the weight of trying to control what is beyond our power. Instead, we are free to live with open hands, receiving His blessings and letting go of what hinders us. Trust frees us to take risks for His kingdom, to love sacrificially, and to live with hope, even in the face of uncertainty. It strikes me as uncertainty itself, that the whole of life is based upon it, the whole framework is based upon it. Trust is an act of worship. It is a declaration that we believe God is who He says He is, and that His promises are true. It is a step of faith into His arms, a willingness to follow wherever He leads, knowing that His presence is our greatest reward. Trusting God is not just an act of obedience, but a pathway to joy, for in Him we find all that our hearts have been longing for. In the end, God's message is not just something we hear, but something we are called to embrace, live out and share. It is timeless, reaching across history to speak directly to our hearts, yet it comes with a cost, a surrender of our pride, comfort, and worldly attachments. It is a call to trust even when the path is uncertain, knowing that His plans are higher and His promises steadfast. This message is not abstract or distant. It is deeply personal, meeting us in whispers that comfort and thunder that awakens. It invites us into a relationship with the One who knows us fully and loves us completely. It calls us to a life of purpose and transformation, where we are not merely spectators but active participants in His divine plan. Though the road may be narrow and the challenge is real, the reward far outweighs the cost. In responding to God's message, we find hope, freedom, and the joy of walking with Him. We are reminded that this life, with all its struggles and triumphs, is but the beginning of an eternal journey with our Creator. May we have the courage to listen, the faith to trust, and the humility to obey. For in God's message we discover not only who He is, but who we are called to be. Children of the Eternal, bearers of His light, and vessels of His love to a world in need. The call is clear, the invitation is open, and the time to respond is now.